Okay, it's been nearly a year of videos. We've covered Marvel, DC, Doctor Who, silent films, video games, body horror, but I've danced around this long enough. It's time for the big one. The one you've all been waiting for. The one that I have avoided for so long. Let's not beat around the bush any longer, although, as I said to your mother last night, it is one hell of a bush. It's time to do the Star Wars video. And just to celebrate, I've looked at recent trends in cinema and in video games, and I've come to the decision that for this occasion, my special guest will be the digitally puppeteered corpse of Sir Alec Guinness. It's such an honour, Sir Alec. Please tell me, how are you feeling about looking at some more Star Wars today?
I fell in love with other people.
Whoa! Okay, Sir Alec, that's all the time we have for your segment. Thanks for coming down, and I hope to see you again in your upcoming project, Lawrence of Arabia Reloaded. I recently saw the newest Star Wars in the cinema, the first Star Wars film in the better part of a decade. I remember when a similar drought was ended when I was a child, with the 10-year gap between Revenge of the Sith and The Force Awakens seeming to all the world like a lifetime. When Episode 7 released, it brought with it a strange cultural moment, as if all the world were celebrating the return of something thought to be dead. The spire in Dublin was decorated to resemble a lightsaber, a beacon of bright light stretching high above the streets. All anyone could talk about was that Star Wars was coming back, that for the first time we would see the events that unfolded after the defeat of the Empire in 1983. The film's release reflected this feeling, soaring to the top of the American box office, where it remains the highest grossing film domestically in American history. Critically, the film was liked, its near-exact resemblance to A New Hope being considered a downside, but the strength of its form considered enough to render it a decent time at the movies. For a moment, it almost seemed like the cultural rage surrounding George Lucas's prequel trilogy had given way to a moment of peace. But then, like the change in air pressure that comes before a storm, something felt off. Slowly but surely after its release, something began to shift in the coverage of the film. Where previously people had celebrated the return of their beloved franchise, suddenly now strange questions were being posed. A black stormtrooper? A woman Jedi? These reactions were always going to happen, but where previously such discourse would have been reserved for the cesspit of 4chan, these talking points began to break through into the mainstream internet. All at once, it seemed that if you opened YouTube, the front page would be decrying that Rey was a Mary Sue. These ideas were breaking through into mainstream spaces, but for the moment it seemed that they were remaining minority voices. After all, being practically a remake of A New Hope, there is something comforting to the structure of The Force Awakens that appeases the desires of the fandom as a whole. And so time passed. The release of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story the next year saw yet another well-liked, albeit flawed film added to the canon. Once again, this film dared to feature a woman in the leading role, but the digital puppeteering of the corpse of Peter Cushing, the similarly computer-generated facsimile of a young Carrie Fisher, the references to C-3PO and R2-D2, and the unnecessary presence of Darth Vader once again acted as a cool towel to soothe the quickly heating tempers of the online fans. After all, this film may have made mistakes by allowing minorities to lead its story, but at the end of the day it was still respecting the lore, and as long as those doctrines were kept alive, nothing could go wrong. Then 2017. Star Wars Episode 8 The Last Jedi releases globally. For the first week or so, there is silence. Calm. The film races to a $1 billion box office. It attains the most favourable critical response since 1980's The Empire Strikes Back. It achieves an A cinema score, indicating high levels of audience appreciation. Put simply, for that first week or two, this film is a roaring success. But then all hell broke loose. First, it was the familiar grumblings from those expected sections of social media. But they grew. And they grew quickly, spreading through every segment of the online discourse sphere to the point that offline coverage of this film began to report on the backlash. The backlash being so severe, so vitriolic, so bigoted that actress Kelly Marie Tran deleted all of the posts on her Instagram account after enduring months of harassment from these people. There was a sort of cultural perception change that occurred that transformed the runaway success of this film, the factual proof of people initially loving it, into a failure, to the point that now the film is just widely considered to have been a misfire, despite literally every metric pointing the other direction. Even considering after the onset of this reaction, the film was still the best-selling Blu-ray and DVD release of 2018. This was a film that people wanted to purchase to keep in their homes, even in the waning years of physical media. So why this movie? What was it about Episode 8 that empowered the bigoted online trolls to spread their vitriol across mainstream platforms? And, more crucially, what was it about this film that led the wider cultural audience to accept their framing and adopt this twisted alternate history? For that, we have to talk about the scariest thing of all, the actual film itself. Invariably, when I talk to people about this film, the most common point they bring up against it is the characterization of the elder Luke Skywalker, the disillusioned recluse who has lost his faith in the struggle to which he has dedicated his life. Now, I think that this element of the film, while certainly an inevitable source of controversy, is more so just a single tangible point through which people can channel a deeper dissatisfaction with this film's messaging. In order to understand why Luke Skywalker is an arsehole here, we must first begin by understanding this film's approach to the Star Wars mythos. The first scene of this film is a classic Star Wars big space battle. The Resistance is fleeing through space to find a new base of operations while being pursued by the First Order's deadly dreadnought. In this opening, our lovable renegade pilot, Commander Poe Dameron, launches an attack on the First Order, leading a fleet of bombers in an out-of-the-box attempt to put up a decent fight. The plan, while spectacular, fails miserably, resulting in the destruction of the entire bombing fleet and Dameron's demotion from commander to captain. You might have missed it, but this is the film making its first point about Star Wars. War is not a game. Rebellion is not an opera. You do not win battles by being the loudest, most dramatic opponent. You win by executing strategies well. Our Han Solo stand-in, Poe Dameron, has just shown us what happens when you get wrapped up in the idea of noble individual heroism. You end up with fewer resources, more exhausted, and with no way of defending yourself from a stronger, more resilient opponent. This is a part of what this film is trying to say about rebellion. Throughout the film, we see rejections of the classic idealistic individual displays of heroism in favour of a more anonymized view of struggle. The first person we see die in this film is not one of our heroes making a noble last stand, it is an unnamed bomber pilot who gives their life so that they might drop their payload onto the dreadnought's hull. When Finn and Rose try to make their grand escape from Canto Bight, they do it by enlisting the help of unnamed stable-hand children and by freeing enslaved animals. In the film's third act, it is not Leia or Poe or any of our leads who make the ultimate sacrifice to save the Resistance fleet from General Hux. It is Admiral Holdo, who for the entire film has served as an inconvenience, an obstacle to the moments of heroism to which we understand Poe is entitled. This collectivism, the anonymization of the rebellion, the understanding that no real war is won by birthright or the right of being the protagonist, is the key to understanding Luke's portrayal, because it further extends to the film's portrayal of the Force. Coming off of the back of The Force Awakens, it would have been very easy to make this film a restaging of The Empire Strikes Back in the same way that that film had been a quasi-remake of A New Hope. The structure is all there. Our hero goes to study the Force with a reclusive, eccentric Jedi Master, while the rebellion struggles to survive amidst a renewed assault by our Imperial antagonists, culminating in a dramatic revelation of the hero's familial identity allowing them to try to bring the villain's iconic masked enforcer back over to the light and save the universe. Job done, $1 billion box office. But what Rian Johnson understood is that portrayal of the Resistance does a disservice to the conflict that is actually being shown, and so, in order to rescue any chance of this film being anything worth talking about, he must partake in some subversion. So, what is Luke's first action in the film? He throws away his father's lightsaber, the same one that he lost so many years ago in his most fateful battle with Darth Vader. He refuses to school Rey in the ways of the Force. He is simply a grumpy old man hiding himself away from the rest of the universe, obsessing over his sacred Jedi texts, refusing to let go of the guilt and shame that fuels him. Guilt and shame over what? A time years ago where for just a moment he allowed his fear of the dark side to control him, when he stood over the sleeping Ben Solo and, unconsciously, ignited his lightsaber. The heat, the light, the sound of it jolted him out of his stupor, but it was too late. He'd already done it. Kylo Ren was born in that fear. He hid himself away, seeking to understand the Force, to master this religious philosophy as penance. It is only when he sees the hologram of his sister, Leia, from all those years ago, begging Obi-Wan Kenobi for his help, that he is snapped out of the relentless self-loathing that has kept him trapped on this planet. He begins to teach Rey the ways of the Force, and when she reaches out and draws on the dark side, he manages not to repeat his worst mistake. However, it is only when the ghost of Master Yoda appears that he finally understands the point. Yoda burns the sacred Jedi texts because they don't matter. Dogmas, rules, preconceptions, canon, none of this is what matters. What matters is action. Luke has allowed himself to wallow in pity for years, and the galaxy has suffered for it. In order to actually absolve himself of his sins, he has to make the ultimate sacrifice for the collective. Instead of remain where he is, indulging in the selfish pleasure of shame, he has to give his life so that the Resistance can live on, and trust that the people that he knows, the people who have shaped him and who he has shaped in kind, will be able to carry on the important lessons without him. Often you see a critique of this film as subversive with no purpose. The idea that the killing of Snoke, the desecration of Star Wars iconography, the revelation that Rey's ancestry is nothing special, was all done arbitrarily, as if Johnson just shrugged and said, why not? This speaks to a fundamentally incurious perspective, one that is unwilling to understand how these decisions link together to both rebuke the traditions of Star Wars and to lay out a vision for what this franchise should be telling us. Snoke is killed because all evil does not lie with an emperor sitting on a throne cackling maniacally. It perpetuates within systems. Killing Snoke is a palliative, one that merely shifts up the current hierarchy of the First Order to replace him. The iconography is desecrated because it does not matter. If the Resistance wins, it will not be because they had Anakin's lightsaber on their side. It will be because they fought a bloody, brutal war and won. Rey's family has to be anonymous, because otherwise you are leaning back into that same Star Wars tradition of prophesied heroes, chosen messiahs, and dynastic inheritance. It is for that same reason, to prove that the potential for heroism, for radical action in the name of good, for true rebellion, lies within everyone, that this film ends with its most important image. Not the dramatic death of Luke Skywalker, not the against all odds victory of the Resistance, but a little boy with no name, no story, no great destiny, showing that he has the Force. Heroes are not decided by some otherworldly metric of importance. There are no protagonists to war. There are just people with the ability and the courage to do what needs to be done, to stand up for what they believe in, and to resist the comforts of evil. And that is why the backlash to this film was so severe. This film rebukes the comforting traditions of Star Wars in order to tell a real story about the universal potential for good. It critiques everything Star Wars has been saying since 1980, so of course that would make a fanbase uncomfortable. And in the age of outrage algorithms meant to lash out at anything that steps outside of the perceived norms, the sacred texts, naturally that discomfort would spin up into something far more sinister. A society built on the foundations of individualism and idealistic visions of singular heroism must always, without fail, seek to destroy any popular media that would challenge those foundations by reminding people that we are a collective human race, not an 8 billion long series of self-obsessed individuals. If the original Star Wars was meant to make children believe they could be Luke Skywalker, this film sets out to show that you don't have to be Luke Skywalker to do good, you just have to be brave enough to fight for other people. Disney, being a massive capitalist corporation, caved to the backlash. They produced a third entry in this trilogy that undoes everything important about The Last Jedi and began to relentlessly pump out Star Wars branded slop absent of meaning to keep fans happy. Of course, fans aren't happy, but they don't understand why. They will always pursue the easy explanation that it isn't respecting the lore enough because the real explanations are much harder to swallow. What is comforting is not always what is right. Star Wars is, by now, a cultural museum, a monument of worship for a dwindling fan base whose average age skews higher and higher every year as they participate in yearly nostalgic self-pleasuring rituals. And in a few years, when this franchise has dried up for the last time, it will be almost unthinkable to remember the time when its most successful film in 40 years was one that challenged an audience rather than comforted them. Thank you all so much for watching, and here's to another year.